here at the, thank you, at the Center for Partnerships and Innovation at NARUC. You are here for a Regulators Financial Toolbox on behind-the-meter energy storage. Our Financial Toolbox series is designed to help regulators understand emerging technologies and also think about how to have investments in those technologies get paid for under current utility business arrangements. A very quick introduction to CPI. If you would advance that, Jessica. We are the group within NARUC that provides technical assistance to our members, the Public Utility Commissions and staff. And this is not an eye chart. This is an example of our CPI fact sheet, which you can find on our website, which is a good, quick introduction to the variety of things that we have been doing and things that are up and coming. And we try to keep that fairly up to date. So I encourage you to go to our website for that. Speaking of upcoming events, we've got a few that I want to share with you. In a couple of weeks, we'll be having one of our innovation webinars about coordinating energy efficiency funding from the federal IRA and building infrastructure law legislation, and figuring out how to coordinate that with regulated utility programs. I'm going to put registration links for all three of these in the chat when I'm done speaking. We also have our performance-based regulation state working group, which has been going on for several years and is quite active in investigating that topic and sharing information about how states can use PBR to advance their policy goals. And then really excited about a series we have coming up on integrated distribution system planning and resilience. And this is an in-person 2-day training, one on the distribution system planning side and one on resilience training. And we're doing them 3 times in various locations across the country to make it easier for people to get there in person. You can see the dates there. We have open registration for the upcoming November meeting. And so if that looks like the one you want to attend, please do register and you will find more information on that page. And the last thing I want to mention is our upcoming annual meeting, which is very soon for those of us who are planning and making arrangements. I don't expect you to try to catch that whole URL. I'll put that in the chat as well. We'll be in La Quinta, California, and as usual, we have a great program lined up for our annual meeting. And so I hope you'll consider joining us there. So with that, I will introduce the Honorable Catherine Paratic, who is at the Michigan Public Service Commission, who moderates panels for us often, which is great because she's very good at it. She helps chair our electric vehicle state working group. So I know that there's an intersection there with storage. And I will let her come on and speak a little bit to her perspective on the issue, and before she introduces the panelists and we get underway. The last thing I'll say is please do use the Q&A feature if you have questions for our panelists, and we will get to those at the end of the program. Commissioner Paratek will monitor those and get those questions out to the panelists so we can hear what you're interested in and get answers to your questions. So with that, Commissioner, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate that kind introduction, and I definitely want to thank NARUC and the Center for Partnerships and Innovation in particular for your excellent leadership in education for new technologies and business models. And I really value the work and the outreach that CPI does in this area, and this is one excellent example of that sort of work with this webinar today. So thank you for that. As Jeff mentioned, I'm a commissioner on the Michigan Public Service Commission. I have been in this position since January of 2021. So I'm actually coming up on 3 years now in the position, which both somehow feels like yesterday and forever simultaneously. But prior to joining the commission, I was actually an energy storage project developer. relevant to this conversation. I'm an engineer by training. I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in energy systems engineering. And right after graduating with my master's, I worked for 2 years for Vestas, the wind turbine manufacturer. And then after those 2 years, I've been in energy storage ever since, until joining the commission. I worked for a series of technology startup companies that were inventing compressed air energy storage technology for a period of time. And then, and actually that's what the pictures on the wall behind me are. I was chatting with Jeff about this a little bit before the call started. The pictures on the wall are kind of artsy photos from close-up photos from pieces of equipment at a compressed air energy storage facility that we built in Gaines County, Texas. This one is a hydraulic valve. That's a pressure vessel, and that's the interior of a electrical panel. So maybe you might consider me a bit of an energy storage nerd, but I will happily embrace that title. So after working in the energy storage technology development on the engineering side, I moved to energy storage project development. So actually developing and building those energy storage projects from the the financial and regulatory side. So we built a compressed air energy storage facility in Goderich, Ontario. We built some lithium-ion battery projects, and really interestingly, a flywheel in Minto, Ontario, a 2 megawatt flywheel that provided frequency regulation for the Ontario grid. And relevant to this conversation today, we also installed a behind-the-meter virtual power plant with Tesla Powerwalls during my time there as well. We identified a substation owned by Toronto Hydro in downtown Toronto that was going to need significant upgrades. And so we partnered, the company that I was with at the time is called Enerstore. It's an energy storage project developer, partnered with Toronto Hydro to install a group of power walls in residents' homes around the substation that would be deployed when the substation became constrained. And but when the substation wasn't constrained, the residential customers could then use the batteries for backup for their own usage. Particularly in the event of an outage, they were able to take the energy from those batteries and power their homes. The project developer themselves could also use a portion of the battery's capacity for wholesale market participation. They aggregated the batteries and then participated in the market to earn some revenue off of that project. And then Toronto Hydro, the utility, was able to use a portion of the capacity to meet some of their reliability requirements as well. So it was a really interesting project. It was oh gosh, what year was this? It was a while ago. So a bit ahead of its time. These are becoming a little bit more common now. It was a really good learning experience to just see the benefits that that behind the meter power plants and behind the meter energy storage was able to provide to a local system. So some of these challenges that I encountered during my time as an energy storage project developer are actually what led me to this position on the commission. As I was, working with that developer, realized that storage really wasn't being fully valued. Its benefits were not fully understood. There was an increasing need for storage at all levels of the system and very little progress or opportunity to build it, even though that need really was there. So when the spot opened up on the Michigan Public Service Commission, I went all in. And now I can talk about storage from the perspective as a regulator as well. So I'll take just a minute or so to do that. So in Michigan, I'll talk about our approach to behind the meter energy storage investments briefly. So how do these fit into the broader planning and energy context for Michigan? I think we tend to think about it in 3 ways. The first being benefits of resilience. Resilience is a major focus of our commission in Michigan right now. And behind the meter storage has the opportunity to provide this needed resilience for many customers. While batteries do have a limited duration, of course, their energy can be used for essential electrical loads like refrigerators in the summer if there's a power outage, or just the blower fans on a gas furnace in the winter in the event of a power outage, as well as many others. Those are just two fairly critical examples. And then you can also use the batteries to increase utilization of rooftop solar installations, and we see that pretty extensively for new installations in the state of Michigan. I looked up the number prior to this call now, and 18% of all of our rooftop solar installations last year included a home battery installation as well, which I think is a relatively large amount, 18%. Especially given the costs associated with installing that. I think it really just shows the benefits and the value that's placed on individual resilience. So in addition to resilience, I think the location and quantity need to be planned for in load forecasting and distribution planning. So that's another focus where we're really looking at behind the meter storage. So the way that we're using electricity is changing, with DERs, with electric vehicles, with home electrification. And as I just mentioned, behind the meter energy storage is also increasing. So we at the Commission need to understand for ourselves and ensure that our utilities are anticipating these changes, and that ensure that the utility investments are happening in the right place, to really plan for the location and quantity of any new behind the meter storage installations. And then the third place where we're really planning in terms of behind the meter assets is with wholesale aggregation. I mentioned this in the Ontario context with the project developer from my previous life. But we're just starting to get into this in Michigan and in a very limited capacity. So recently, we in Michigan opened up the ability for aggregated participation for behind the meter assets in demand response wholesale markets, and but only for loads greater than 1 megawatt. So we're starting at the larger end, testing out how this is going to work, how the participation will go, and then evaluate from there. So I think that there's a big potential for wholesale aggregation going forward. And then finally, before I introduce our panelists and hand it over to them, I just wanted to give an overview of how we at the Michigan Commission look at behind the meter storage pilot or full program requests from utilities. So regarding specific requests, we need to really understand what the benefit is to customers. So the costs are a lot easier to understand in a program context. The benefits really need to be fully explained for us to be able to evaluate the request and be able to grant that cost recovery. So we're actually going through a benefit cost analysis, or a BCA process now at our commission, and there will soon be a full stakeholder process to develop a BCA template, where you'll be able to kind of input those costs, input those benefits, and then understand if the benefits outweigh the costs in a very clear and structured manner, and a very transparent manner that anyone who understands how to work our e-docket system will be able to find. And then so we can look at these requests in multiple arenas. They're typically presented in Michigan, at least. They're typically presented as a part of rate cases. Sometimes we get planning and investment approvals as part of our integrated resource plans. They can be submitted totally separately as an ex parte request. But what I wanted to highlight is a new expedited pilot program that we just initiated this year in Michigan. And this expedited pilot program allows utilities to apply for pilot approval and be approved within 90 days. The total cost per utility is limited per year. And for our two largest utilities, that limit is at $10 million per year. So these won't be, the largest of the large pilot projects, but I think they can still be fairly substantial. And we, as at the commission, have committed to review these pilot applications within that shorter 90-day time period to allow for some faster iteration of innovation and just be able to really see some progress happen in terms of implementing these pilot programs and getting this testing done, so we can move past the pilots and be able to deploy these needed programs at full scale. So that's a bit of an overview of my background and also of what we're working on in terms of behind the meter energy storage for the state of Michigan. Now we get to actually hear from the experts in this area, our panelists for this webinar. We have three fantastic speakers, and I'll just briefly introduce all three now prior to passing it on. We have, going first is Ryan Chan, who is the principal on the customer generation and storage team at Pacific Gas and Electric. Ryan and his team provide resiliency solutions, including battery storage for customers who are impacted by wildfire safety outages. And he'll give the first presentation today. Our second speaker team is from Tesla. They both Arushi Sharma Frank and Greg Thurner are teaming up for a presentation. Arushi is Tesla's energy market design lead and senior counsel for energy regulatory matters in both retail and wholesale markets. And Greg is the staff technical program manager at Tesla. And he joined the company this year to further the adoption of virtual power plants after 23 years in the electric power industry. And then finally, we have our third speaker today. Third presentation is Mark LaBelle. Mark is a lawyer with a background in math and economics, and he works at the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP. And he works on numerous regulatory reforms for gas and electric utilities, including a focus on rate design, cost allocation, and net metering reform. So we've got a really fantastic lineup of presentations ahead of us. As the presentations are going, please, as Jeff mentioned, feel free to add any questions into the chat and as they come up. And then we will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end, where we can go through those questions that come up as a part of the presentations. And then I also have a few questions that I'll likely have for the presenters as well. So without further ado, I would love to pass it over to Ryan for the first presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that, and really excited to be here today. This is a topic near and dear to our hearts at PG&E. So Ryan Chan, I'm a principal on the customer generation and storage team at PG&E. Our team focuses on resiliency solutions for customers impacted by wildfire safety outages, which we'll talk about more. I have a background in engineering, so I got my bachelor's in bioengineering actually at UC San Diego. And I have a master's in mechanical engineering from UCSD as well. I've been at PG&E for about 10 years. The majority of that I've spent actually on the energy efficiency side in programs and policy. I've spent the entire time in customer programs, so have a lot of experience with the programs that interact with our customers. I've been on this specific team for maybe about a year and a half. So with that, I will say we are very bullish on storage here at PG&E, and we just see a lot of benefits and just a lot of untapped potential that we're really just starting to scratch the surface into. We're really excited about it for two key reasons. First, as many of you know, California has very ripe wildfire conditions. And when those conditions and risks are at their highest, we may implement wildfire safety outages to really reduce the risk of ignition. We originally started doing this with what we call public safety power shutoffs, or PSPS. These are pre-announced outages that affect a specific geography, and those are, vary in duration, but they're usually on the order of like multiple hours. More recently, though, we've increasingly been implementing a different kind of wildfire safety outage, which are called EPSS outages, which stands for Enhanced Power Line Safety Settings. These are essentially sensitivity settings, which will automatically shut off power when a hazard is detected on the line. And we found these outages to be very effective, but they are unplanned, unlike our PSPS outages. They're unplanned and they're shorter. And that kind of gives a lot of potential for behind the meter storage to mitigate outages like that. Because there's enough, you generally will have enough juice in battery storage to be able to ride out through an outage like that. And so storage in that sense helps us keep the system safe through when these wildfire related outages are necessary, and really minimizes the disruption to customers' daily lives. So that's the first reason, and probably one of the biggest reasons. Secondly, we have a ton of renewables here in California, and storage helps us really maximize the benefits of those renewables and offset usage when prices are at their highest. So it's really that three-pronged benefit, which is being able to keep our customers connected, minimizing costs across the system, and utilizing clean energy to its extent that really kind of gets us really excited about storage. I'm going to talk today about a couple of our programs, which are on the screen. I don't have a lot of slides. I think I'll mostly be voicing over a lot of these things. But the two programs I want to talk about are the Residential Storage Initiative and the Generator and Battery Rebate Program, which you see currently on the screen. These are both programs that were born out of resiliency needs, so they're funded through our wildfire mitigation work. And they're run out of our shop, the Customer Generation and Storage team. First is the Residential Storage Initiative. So this is a no-cost turnkey installation of batteries on select circuits. So these are circuits that are heavily impacted by these EPSS outages, like just the geography and nature of the weather kind of really makes customers on these certain circuits more susceptible to these outages. The RSI really focuses on income qualified customers and customers with medical needs. So as you can see, we're not targeting a ton of installations, so we really try to focus that down on the customers most in need. So we started this last year. We were originally targeting about 300 customers. We're hoping to get to the 600 range by the end of this year. And we're on track to hit that. We feel pretty good that this program is going to have a real impact for those customers. That is a direct install offering. So it's very, we have a contracted partner which does the outreach, enrolls a customer, talks them through the terms and conditions and what have you, and they facilitate the installation implementation for the customer. The other offering, which I'll talk about, is the generator and battery rebate program. This is more of a traditional downstream rebate. So it is a $5,000 rebate for to offset the cost of permanent battery storage for similar circuits that are highly impacted by these EPSS outages. So this is a larger population. It's not income restricted or not restricted to customers with medical needs like the RSI is. So it's more of a general market program. We are looking for about 1,000 projects this year. And this is really kind of an offering designed to fit into kind of the typical sales process, right? Like it's like rebate programs have been around for a long time. This is another one that solar and storage developers can talk about when they talk to their customers and are trying to sell a project. One interesting thing, or I think is interesting at least, thing that that are common to both of these programs is that we're trying to get as much grid benefit out of these programs as we can, despite the fact that they're really formed as resiliency programs. So we've required participation in a program called Power Saver Rewards, which is an incentive program that came out of a lot of grid reliability needs at our commission. And that program is really just incentivizing customers to reduce load when electric demand's at its highest. And I think just in general, we're really trying and focused to try to get as much value out of these installations as possible. So even though these are resiliency products, trying to facilitate those customers' moves into demand response programs, other load management programs, to try to get as much value out of those batteries is really what we're focused on in terms of trying to make this a scalable and sustainable program in the future. I mentioned that these are funded out of our wildfire mitigation work. That is all expense spending today. We are looking at, I would say we're constantly looking at ways to reduce the per unit cost of these programs, just to offset and to minimize the costs and non-participants. So we're looking at things like how can we pull in external or third-party capital to reduce rate impacts? How can we look at like resiliency as a service type models through structures like tariff on bill, where we can have a service charge and the customer gets the benefit of resiliency for like a monthly charge. So we're looking at models like that. Still really kind of scratching the surface of that. And so, but it's something we're really excited about. We see a lot of potential in that sort of model to really kind of expand these programs. I don't have much more to present. I will close and say, I think a lot of where we're thinking about taking these programs in the future is more around how do you stack different sources of value. So I talked a lot about the resiliency and grid reliability benefits. There's just a lot of benefits too to having customers adopt multiple DERs, right? So storage plus solar in a home has a lot more benefits than solar in one home and storage in a different home, right? And similarly, right, like if storage can help you ride out outages. If your appliances are very efficient, then you can ride out an outage just that much longer, right? So I think we're really trying to figure out how do how do we layer these DER offerings together? It's challenging because that kind of breeds a lot of different program rules and restrictions. But we think there's just a lot of symbiotic benefits from having like multiple DERs together. And that's one way we think we can also, kind of like streamline programs and make them more efficient in reaching our customers. And that in turn also lowers the per unit cost. So that's all I have for now. I'm sure we'll be discussing more in the Q&A section. But thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate that. That was a great overview of battery storage initiatives at PG&E. I'm sure that we'll have a lot of questions from the audience. You can either put them in the chat, or the Q&A is probably a little bit easier if you want to type anything in as you are thinking about it during the presentations. Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, next we have a presentation from Tesla, both from Arushi Sharma-Frank and Greg Thurner. Arushi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much, everyone, for hosting this today. This is an incredibly relevant topic, and we're really thrilled to have begun with the PG&E program. Tesla participates specifically in the Emergency Load Reduction Program to provide PG&E that emergency capacity through power walls that are sited at residential premises. Each system is 5 kilowatts. Many or most customers have 2 storage systems, so that's a total of 10 kilowatts, out of which a percentage is made available through the program design from PG&E and other utilities participating in the CPUC program. And we've seen 2 summer seasons now. This year's summer season is actually still continuing for another few days that have been incredibly valuable in showing the value behind meter storage. What we do at Tesla at a global scale really started in the behind the meter storage space with our pilot with the South Australian Housing Authority and the South Australian government and market operator AMO, all the way back in the 2016-2017 timeframe, where we made a really clear case based on technical capacity of the battery systems, both at the residential and at the grid scale utility level, about how they can support the grid. That program has evolved, and along the way, a lot of the lessons that we are continuing to learn about the resiliency value stack for storage is being applied throughout the world in new programs and in expanding current programs, including most recently the uncapping of the Green Mountain Power Program in Vermont. Our business lead, Greg Thurner, is going to go through the deck. He really leads our VP and Tesla residential energy storage programmatic creation, as well as the expansion of existing programs across the US and globally. So I will just pause on my chat here and be available for questions and discussion and turn it over to Greg.
Hey, good afternoon. I appreciate the introduction and the feedback from my fellow panelists. Certainly appreciate the interest and enthusiasm around what I'll refer to as a simple but elegant device that is distributed storage installed at residential premises. Simple in that, like any energy storage device, it can simply charge or discharge, and elegant in that when coordinated with the utility or grid needs, can create and unlock some tremendous value. So if we'll advance to the next slide, we're going to walk through a 4-square where I'll categorize the contribution that we see from some of our customers who are operating programs in the context of resiliency, flexibility, economics, and consumer engagement. So just to pass through those very quickly before we give an in-depth review and perhaps some potential example programs that we orchestrate currently, I'll categorize resiliency as the metrics that I'm sure you're very familiar with. That is customer observed interruptions and durations, SAIDI, SAIFI, and CAIDI, traditional utility metrics for quantifying our performance as an industry at delivering continuity and quality of service. In the context of flexibility, I'll speak to storage as a device that can respond to changing grid conditions. And we've had some very new and innovative applications in some of the competitive markets in which we operate, certainly applicable in traditional and vertically integrated utilities as well, where these resources can be activated to respond to intermittency of renewables or perhaps changing patterns in load. When I speak to economics, I believe we're all aware and all experiencing the energy transition as it manifests through our respective service territories. And this creates economic opportunities to essentially save that potential for later when it's in surplus and count on that storage when the sun sets or the renewable production fades. And finally, I'll speak to engagement, and I have a screen grab here from one of the other panelists' website. PG&E is one of many utilities that use this as an opportunity to interact with their customers. And as industry enthusiasts, participants, energy managers, I'm sure we can appreciate that many of our customers' only engagement opportunity with their respective utility or electric provider is a bill, a move out, or an outage. And I'm sure we can all agree that those aren't the most scintillating customer experiences we can create. Distributed behind the meter storage is a unique opportunity to engage that customer and perhaps, if not include them in the planning and operation of our system, give them a glimpse into how hard we work to create this seamless and transparent provision of electric service. So let's advance to the next slide and focus on resiliency. This is a graphic that I compiled from I believe it was EIA data, showing in the bottom two lines how Sadie, Safety, Katie, relatively flat, slightly upward sloping, and of course, an increase in these metrics or average interruption or duration of interruption is not a good thing. And I differentiate the top two lines from the bottom two lines in that they are with and without major events. So regardless of your independent or individual beliefs on climate change, we are experiencing more weather severity. More weather severity threatens the continuity of service and serving our customers within our territory. This decline is pervasive, continued, and in many instances offset where distributed storage is applied. So you'll see it's no coincidence the average duration, and this is national average, 119 minutes. Many of this distributed storage solutions that you see available commercially are 2-hour batteries, Powerwall included. And in some instances, utilities have installed these devices not only to reduce the apparent impact of major events, but improve the continuity of service experienced by their electric customers. I think the next slide, you'll see some applications. If we could advance, PG&E did a great job, Ryan. Thank you both for your dialogue and your participation in these types of programs where we can have targeted installations of distributed storage to tackle particularly unique engineering challenges. I'm reminiscing now internally in my dialogue on my distribution engineering days where in rural parts of Texas, we would often be dispatched to figure out how a squirrel took out a substation or a wide area outage when we design very carefully systems to prevent against this occurrence. But perhaps more generally, natural impacts to the distribution system, whether it be tree, public interference, animal in nature, whatever the case may be, these momentary transitory interruptions can often be arrested or remedied by a local distributed storage solution. And where there are unique, natural, or pervasive challenges like the California wildfire risk that Ryan discussed in depth, it can be a very topical or triaged solution. Green Mountain Power, as others have mentioned, and if you referenced or read the New York Times article recently, is a way that this particular utility has decided that they're going to combat their independent issues with continuity of service, with distributed storage as an alternative to investment in more infrastructure. Short of a copper sheet, there is only so much wire that we can create. And no matter what we create, it's amazing Mother Nature seems to defeat us. But it's very difficult to interrupt service when it's provided at the residential or commercial industrial premise. That added resiliency, in this case, is something that Green Mountain Power has piloted for close to 6-7 years. Now planning to expand to ensure that their utility dollar is best invested and realized by their customer in a very palpable way. There's nothing more apparent to a customer than when a utility truck rolls to triage, troubleshoot, restore service, except perhaps when a utility truck rolls to install a storage implement on their dwelling. And then once it's there, of course, it's invisible, it's quiet, it does its job, and perhaps by way of the customer engagement that we deploy, the customer Tesla app, know that it's doing its job, particularly in times of scarcity, or in this case, system trouble or distribution outages. Let's go to the next slide, please. You'll see here, we're at the beginning of a journey with a tremendous resource that's already installed on the island of Puerto Rico. 375 megawatts of distributed power walls are installed on an island whose peak load is around 24 to 2,800 megawatts. I'll pause for a moment. I know I have a tendency to speak quickly when I get really excited about this topic, but that's tremendous. Close to 20–25% of their peak demand could be carried in short duration by Powerwalls. I'll caveat that remark that short durations, 15 minutes to 2 hours, is critical, just like receiving medical care in the early onset or aftermath of a stroke. A utility system experiencing a transitory or perhaps resource failure can often arrest load shed or forestall or eliminate controlled separations of load when they have an online and available resource ready to respond. And in the case of distributed storages, there are few technologies that can respond faster than inverter-based paralleled distributed storage systems. In fact, they can respond and be metered in fractions of a second in the industry known as cycles. So this is a tremendous resource that was built at the expense of the dwelling owners or occupants. They've elected to install this resiliency that is only soon to be realized as a benefit to not only the non-owners of Powerwalls, but all customers served by this territory when that device is activated to arrest, decay, or forestall an imminent outage, which unfortunately in the case of Puerto Rico happens quite regularly. In some instances in the summer, it can be a daily occurrence. So we're very excited to see the benefits realized from resiliency in Puerto Rico from a distributed energy storage solution. Let's see what's on the next slide. From an economics perspective, you'll see a couple of graphics here. On the left, this is a snapshot of what I routinely look at day over day when operating an aggregation of our Powerwalls in the competitive markets of ERCOT. We operate a retail portfolio. That retail portfolio has exclusively at this time Tesla customers, many of whom have Powerwalls, solar, and or vehicles. And in this case, we've aggregated by way of an ERCOT pilot program several hundred residential dwellings to respond to ERCOT's dispatch signals. And this is very unique because in vertically integrated markets, we have a orchestrated dispatch by a single entity, perfectly transferable to competitive markets where that single entity is dispatching not necessarily resources, but collections of bids and offers. In this case, we've aggregated a collection of Powerwalls to respond to an ERCOT dispatch by expressing their willingness to curtail with a price. ERCOT's pilot has also allowed us to offer ancillary services or grid reserves such that we can be compensated and reward our customers for participating in this program and reserving their capacity to flex when it's needed the most. Now, this value is ubiquitous in vertically integrated utilities or competitive markets. I think the only difference that I appreciate having worked on both sides of the fence is that competitive markets do a very precise job of valuing flexibility and valuing in real time the incremental benefits from a kilowatt or a megawatt of energy at a particular location. And we've had tremendous experience in operating this asset and look forward to expanding this pilot to provide more ancillary services or more reserves at faster time horizons so that the benefits truly created by distributed storage can be better realized. You'll see on the right-hand corner of the slide, we have both the dispatch and the response of this asset in the northern region of ERCOT, connected to Encore's transmission and distribution system. And at the time of this screenshot, it was about 200 kilowatt dispatch with a capacity of about a megawatt, representing a couple hundred homes. We have a similar aggregation in Houston, and we have other aggregations throughout Texas that have yet to be activated as we try to refine our cost structure in offering this service so that we can monetize smaller and more diverse assets of or aggregations of Powerwalls. I know I'm going through this very quickly. I hope that we have the benefit to ask detailed questions if you should have them at the end of the presentation. I think I'm nearing home plate on my Foursquare here. Let's see what's next. I haven't spoken much about flexibility, but I imagine this is intuitive to you. As we continue to transition to renewable resources, and I did this study while I was at the ERCOT ISO with some DOE funds around 2010, 2011. Generally speaking, and I don't want to misrepresent the very intelligent, very hardworking folks that I had on my team at ERCOT, but I have to dumb it down to something I can appreciate. As you canvass a region with more and more renewables, the propensity for an interruption to that renewable supply is less probable, but potentially in higher magnitude. Said more simply, these renewable resource ramps, as we canvass a region with solar, wind, or solar and wind, becomes less frequent, but more impactful because the magnitude of that less frequent ramp is larger. And this is where both distributed and front of the meter storage can really shine. No pun intended to the solar community. The benefit of having storage to ride through these black swan events or tail events is that we don't have to rely upon an increasingly large proportion of thermal resources operating at their minimums exclusively to provide that backstop when this infrequent but high consequence ramp occurs. So we have a number of different programs and a number of different varieties of how we implement this across North America. But every ISO has their own flavor, well suited to harness the value delivered by distributed storage when it's activated to participate in a wide area dispatch, whether it be in an ISO or a vertically integrated utility. As I mentioned at the beginning of my comments, the capability is the same. Can charge fast, can discharge fast. And when designed with a program that allows an ISO to harness this capability, we can inherently manage more of this growing queue of renewable capacity that is unlikely to change for the foreseeable future. So let's see what we've got left. I believe I'm near the end of my remarks. I won't say we saved the best for last, but I will say, as I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, we have few opportunities to engage our customers, our mutual customers, whether it be a regulator's constituents, a utilities captive customer base. In the case of Tesla Electric, competitively recruited customers, we have few opportunities to earn their trust, respect, and acknowledgement that we're doing the best we can to maintain continuity of service, lowest cost, with no threat from Mother Nature, which we all know is a looming threat that we can only do our best to ensure against. When we create a program, we create this new avenue to engage customers, raise awareness of the grid stress, not only to exercise their implements that could be behind the meter storage, EV charging, or perhaps just even passive demand response. We engage them in a way that makes them part of the reliability effort. And in doing so, if nothing else, they have a better appreciation for the challenges we face as owners, operators, managers, and stewards of consistent, reliable, low-cost service. And we've managed to do that in an app. I know there are a myriad of solutions and ways to do this, but I think we'll all agree that these types of applications, these types of technologies that we can leverage to engage our customers is far superior to public appeals at the 11th hour. And when you spend the time, you make the investment, you educate your customer base to provide them with timely information about the grid and the tools they need to respond in a time appropriate manner, we get a much more rich and engrossed customer experience. And if you're not among the storage nerds, as the commissioner mentioned earlier, who live and breathe this stuff, perhaps you just have a device that very quietly manages your consumption in a way that is useful to your utility, your ISO, and your neighbors. So thanks for the attention. I apologize for being a bit long-winded. As you can imagine, like you, I live and breathe this stuff and look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Arishi and Greg. I really appreciate the overview of Tesla and the benefits that the Tesla Powerwall behind the meter storage is able to provide. And our final presentation this afternoon is from Mark LaBelle at the Regulatory Assistance Project. Mark.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Paratic, and thank you to NARUC CPI for the invitation today. Very excited to be here. I have a somewhat lengthy slide deck, but it'll move quick. So the Regulatory Assistance Project is a national international nonprofit that works on a variety of thorny regulatory issues, often hand in hand with public utility commissions in the United States. Many of our senior leaders are former state public utility commissioners. Next slide. So I thought it'd be useful just to set the baseline here. There are a lot of older forms of behind-the-meter storage that have mostly been previously used as flexible load. Electric tank water heaters are thermal storage and have been one of the most significant sources of flexible demand and utility programs across the country for decades now. And some of these new technologies that we're working with today are really evolutions and can be thought of as building upon those previous regulatory paradigms. That said, the newer forms of behind-the-meter storage do have more capabilities. They both charge and discharge electric energy. So from a rate design perspective, you want to worry about when those resources are charged as well as when they discharge. They often serve as backup power, unlike electric tank water heaters, although it is often useful to have hot water in a pinch during an outage, but not the same as having electric energy on hand. And in principle, they can also export energy to the grid and not just serve behind the meter uses. It's also relevant that charging and discharging these batteries often has a cost in terms of degradation, so it's not cost-free to cycle a battery. And new rate designs and compensation structures can provide good price signals to operate these resources. It's not necessarily the case that rate designs and some of these other programs that we've been talking about today by themselves will encourage customer adoption, but in combination with federal tax credits or other programs, generally better rate designs and compensation structures can help encourage adoption. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about rate design, it's useful just to have in your back of your mind all of the goals and principles of rate making. We're talking about the need for efficient competition and control of monopoly pricing, reliable service, equity, environmental and public health requirements, and that's at the 10,000-foot level, impact every single decision that commissions make. And then we're talking more specifically about setting utility prices. We care about the effective recovery of the revenue requirement, customer understanding, equitable allocation of costs, and efficient forward-looking price signals. Now, next slide, please. When we care about the operation of these new behind-the-meter storage resources, efficient forward-looking prices is going to be key. And our overarching principle here is that rate design should make the choices that the customer makes to minimize their own bill consistent with the choices they would make to optimize system costs. That's just a more detailed expression of the marginal cost pricing principle that we try to follow in rate design. Next slide. Now, traditional rate design, in part because of metering limitations, has been fairly simple. On the residential side, there's a customer charge that's a flat per month fee, and then a volumetric kilowatt hour charge. This is just illustrative, roughly based on averages across the country. Then for business customers, there's often a larger customer charge, a significant demand charge per month based on the customer's non-coincident peak demand, and then a smaller volumetric charge. And you should think about what these traditional rate designs, what kind of price signals that sends to the customer. For a residential customer, it says, just use your storage as backup power. You don't need to do anything else. Charge when you want, discharge when you want, have it available in case of an outage. For C&I customers, the demand charge does send a price signal. It tells you to use storage to levelize your load and minimize your demand charge. If you're a flat customer already, if you're a high load factor customer already, it doesn't mean much necessarily. But if you're a peaky customer with a lower load factor, you could save a lot of money by introducing storage to clip your peak. Next slide. In a traditional electric system, we typically thought about, one-way flow of power from central generating sources over transmission lines down through a substation and then to distribution level customers primarily. However, next slide. We're starting to see a lot of technology changes over the last couple of decades that are really shifting the paradigm. And our previous presenters started to talk about this. Wind, solar, and storage at the bulk level, customer-sided resources, energy efficiency, demand response, smart grid technologies, advanced metering, electrification of transportation and heating, all of these, and I'll add customer load management technologies more generally, all of those technologies are changing the way the grid can and should operate. Next slide. So in the future, the grid will likely look significantly different than it has in the past. Compared to 2 decades ago, the grid is already starting to become decarbonized and decentralized. Next slide. So what does smart rate design for today or the next few years look like? I think there should continue to be significant differentiation between residential and business rates, particularly larger business customers. This is an illustrative set of rate designs for 2 different customer classes that is achievable in the next few years, if not immediately. This would likely require advanced metering, which not all states have, but many do today. It has a 3-period time of use rate: off-peak, mid-peak, on-peak. For residential customers, there's a tiered customer charge. There's different ways to construct a tiered customer charge, which we could get into. And for business customers, there is a smaller demand charge than in the past. And some of those costs that used to be in demand charge have been shifted to the time-varying kilowatt hour portion of the rate. Now, for those peak times when the grid really needs the resources, for residential customers, you can have a peak time rebate that encourages customers to reduce their usage or export energy, perhaps, to the grid in those crucial times of need. And for C&I customers, a more traditional critical peak price would be perfectly appropriate. Next slide. So that set of smart rate designs is significantly more complex than the traditional rates we've seen in the past. Achieving customer understanding and satisfaction with more complex rates is a significant undertaking for commissions. Customers have to be able to understand their rates and manage their bills. Utilities and commissions, state governments more generally, can provide basic explanations and educational materials. Data provision and online tools can certainly help. But having gradual transitions to diffuse knowledge is crucial as well. You can start with opt-in and move to opt-out or mandatory. You can consider segmenting the residential rate class, having more complex rates for more sophisticated customers, just like we do on the business side. Shadow billing and hold harmless protections are other key billing options. And then companion programs that can be part of energy efficiency programs or separate can be quite important as well. cost-effective energy management technology programs help customer response and minimize negative bill impacts. And that can be as simple as free timers for electric water heaters for low-income ratepayers. Next slide. Now, there's plenty of more complex things that we can think about going even further forward to the future, 2030 and beyond. Many states are already looking into net metering reform, which is going to continue, I'm sure. The state of Michigan, as directed by the legislature and implemented by the commission, has started to implement net metering reform. That's part of the package of benefits to storage in that state. Changes to import rates and export credits are being considered everywhere, and narrower time-based netting periods too. We're starting to see more transactive energy structures. Several years ago, New York adopted the Value of Distributed Energy Resources tariff, and the California recent net metering reforms, also called net billing, have a much more transactive and granular hourly price structure to their net metering credits. And then just a conceptual idea that we at WRAP like to talk about sometimes is something I call the distribution flow charge. Is at some point in the future, should customers contribute to administrative and distribution system costs when they export energy to the grid, not just when they import energy? If it's a two-way highway, it's may be appropriate to charge both ways, not just one. That's just one of many different possible regulatory reforms in the future. Next slide. So putting it all together, the electric system of the future is certainly going to be different than the past, and we need a wide range of regulatory innovations to get good results. Rate design and net metering reforms as a package can provide improved incentives for the usage of energy storage and other distributed resources, but it's going to take some work to implement those. We may need new analytical processes to guide those substantive rate-making reforms. And on the next slide, I have a long list of WRAP publications that touch on all the topics I've presented on today. With that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate that presentation. So we've reached the time for question and answer. I'm going to start off with a couple questions, and I'd also like to ask all of our panelists to please come back onto camera now, so we can have everybody back up on the screen. Wonderful, thanks. And then I'm going to ask a couple questions, but if anybody else does have questions, you can either type them into the Q&A, or we have a relatively small group with us today. If you'd prefer to ask your question live, feel free to raise your hand, and you can be called on to ask your question live. But I'd actually like to start with Mark. Question for you. As you were describing the concept of this smart rate design in your presentation, how specifically does behind the meter storage fit into these designs? You mentioned that customers need to be able to understand their rates in order to be able to make smart decisions for themselves. Most behind the meter energy storage systems are likely initiated by the customer. I guess I don't have data to back that up, but given that it's a behind the meter technology, I would assume that it's generally customer initiated. So how does the customer education on these electric rates fit into this, and how necessary is education to seeing the benefits of storage?
So there's a lot of things happening right now that have feedbacks between them. People are installing storage for a wide variety of their own personal purposes. They're buying big pickup trucks with enormous batteries that serve a variety of the exact same purposes, and on and on. There's a lot of things happening that regulators can't directly control. At the same time, these rate designs, which are justified on their own economic grounds, been talking about them for 50 or 100 years, and couldn't implement them in the past, are enabled by new technologies. And decisions that commissions make on rate design and other related issues help encourage customer adoption of these resources and influence how they get operated. So that's just one of many feedback loops that we have going on here. The existence of energy storage as a resource helps make time varying rates worthwhile, and time varying rates improve the operation of those new resources as people adopt them. And anytime we're making a change, customers get nervous. Doing it slowly, gradualism is an important overarching principle, is part of the picture, and education by the utilities, state agencies, and other trusted groups help smooth that process. So I have colleagues that have been asking for better rate designs for longer than I've been alive. We're finally starting to see some of those things implemented across the country on a default basis. Michigan's been doing that rather slowly in a way that's been sensitive to customer concerns, I think. So, having all these things fit together, smarter economic rate designs, more flexible customers with storage and other resources that can help the system and provide value to all customers. Having all those things work together as a sort of a unified whole is the holy grail of what we're looking for here. So.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's helpful. Ryan, going back to your presentation on how PG&E views behind the meter storage, what are some things that you think about when you're trying to scale these storage programs for the utility? PG&E is one of the largest utilities, and you really have that opportunity for scale. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I mentioned kind of previously in my presentation that we think a lot about not just the participants, but the non-participants in the program, right? And because the money that funds our resiliency programs, but not just our resiliency programs, like pretty much all customer programs, right, is funded through other ratepayers. And so that's a lot of the reason why we are really focused on lowering the per unit cost to really try to minimize that rate impact. Like when it comes to scaling specifically, we always try to pick up whatever economies of scale we can, right? Like from a pilot, moving from a pilot to a full program, right? There's those flat kind of like administrative costs that don't necessarily scale with volume. Like for example, you need a contract in place, you need some staff labor in place. This is what I kind of call the kind of like wedding principle, right? Like whether you have 10 people or 1,000 people at a wedding, you need a DJ, you need a caterer, you need there's like basic things that you need regardless of how large the program is. So we try to pick up those sort of economies of scale, like looking at things like bulk purchasing to try to drive better per unit costs. But on the flip side, there are also things that need to be built, right? Like in a pilot or a smaller program, there's a lot of things that you can do manually because it's the costs to automate it aren't necessarily justified when the quantities are really small. But as you start scaling into, hundreds, thousands of customers sort of range, there's too many risks of error by going through manual processes, right? So you have IT projects then, which can be very long and expensive, and just other sort of automation start to become necessary when you start scaling into, like the thousands of quantities. I think the other thing we think about with regards to scaling is just what is the messaging, right? A lot of what we've currently done, right, is we've really targeted certain circuits and areas of need, so geographies, customer types and profiles. We've really refined those messages and areas. When we start to scale, right, a lot of that targeting is going to be diluted a little bit necessarily, right, because there will just be a much larger customer base to draw from. And so one of the challenges and things that we're thinking about is just like how do you speak directly to those customers' needs, based on kind of like where they are and kind of how they're wired, so to speak. You mentioned PG&E being one of the largest utilities. We have a very diverse customer set, and our territory is very large. We have Central Valley to very mountainous areas. So there's just a lot of different conditions, a lot of different customers, and those are the things that we think about when programs start expanding.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. To the Tesla team, but a question about how you've seen success in encouraging adoption of storage. So what are there any key utility policies that have helped behind the meter storage that PUCs across the country should be paying attention to or looking for in utility programs and rate design proposals that you have seen successful?
Greg, you want to go first and I can round it up?
Sure. Rate design that, I don't want to steal the thunder of the other panelists, but a rate design that's sensitive to charging and discharging is always helpful. Time of use is probably the most vanilla flavor, but of course, net energy metering is not conducive to a program that encourages storage to proliferate or participate in grid programs. Harushi, what am I missing?
So, yeah, I think in terms of market incentives, I think that's right. I think for utility programs, the most success comes from, I think, a pretty short but very effective list. One is any rate design, whether it's a rate or a program, that recognizes the value stack of storage. So there's value and resiliency behind the meter for the customer. What does that mean? That customer is able to manage their own home electricity needs in an outage, which means it's one less customer for the utility to be concerned about when there are issues on the distribution system. So in storage programs, the first most important incentive to get buy-in are dollar incentives. It's a upfront rebate to the customer, incorporating that at a value that is reflective of the value to the system and is useful to the customer given how much storage costs average to install in a service area is super valuable. And then there are other kind of elements of that value stack that become important. Greg alluded to this, but policies that acknowledge that when you add storage to a solar system and it creates a new and different value in a product that you can suddenly provide because you're not just in 24/7 energy. Now you have the ability as a residential customer to provide a resiliency capacity product. Creating a value and assigning that is a piece of the value stack that's pretty darn important because it is something that can be leveraged by the utility system or by the grid operator, as the case may be, to really create the correct price signal for the customer to make a choice between using certain amounts of the reserve power for themselves or exporting it to the system to help the community grid. And that's exactly the value proposition of the PG&E ELRP program, for example. And then last but not least, kind of the third or the most sophisticated version is emergency capacity events, virtual power plant events, essentially creating a additional value in the program design that will compensate the customer for being available when really all other resources are exhausted or close to being exhausted. You're seeing this right now in ERCOT, Texas. You're seeing it in Puerto Rico. You're seeing it on constrained grids around the world, really, where people are trying to figure out how do you motivate a customer who has extra capacity in their storage system to sell some of the energy back to the electric grid to provide that emergency condition restoration. In addition to those policies, Commissioner, I think one of the most important pieces we still face around the country is a lack of education among AHJs around the requirements for behind-the-meter interconnection and typical inspection and permitting processes. Labor issues can be an issue. It's hard sometimes to even file the install crews you need to be able to accomplish the huge demand we have on a regional basis for residential behind-the-meter projects. And I think just addressing that holistically, one of the key pieces that has really helped in getting just basic customer adoption is an interconnection ombudsman that is usually an entity that is either independent of or integrated with a state commission or a regulator or with a utility office so that there can be one single point of accountability to handle the customer's interest in adopting storage all the way to the commissioning of the resource and then enrolling them in whatever incentive programs or grid services programs are available. those are some of kind of the key pieces. And I think in our follow-up materials, I'd be happy to pop a slide in there that kind of points to those policies.
Thanks. So I heard the importance of rate design, program design, valuing that full stack of benefits for storage, and the importance of the interconnection process. Ryan, I know you also mentioned the importance of successful stacking of benefits for storage, and I think I'd like to come back to that. But first, want to get to a couple of the questions that are in the Q&A. We'll start with the first one. So there's a question on, sometimes the biggest challenge seems to be local co-op electricity providers. This question asker is in Texas and would like to know how to help local co-ops realize the benefits of residential storage. And also, what is the best approach to getting utilities to agree to use backup switch? Anybody from the panel want to tackle that one?
I'll
Hearing
defer to Greg.
Yeah, I was going to say either myself or Greg could help with that.
Yeah,
I think
think
Go
there
ahead.
the co-op experience is unique to their service territory and the breadth and depth of their organization. You know, traditional T&D utility in a cooperative territory doesn't always have the same services available to them in terms of being able to aggregate, having a supplier that's able to monetize that capacity, having a network of installers to rely upon. And that there's a spectrum. I noticed that the entity was from Texas, and there's a spectrum of capabilities. I do believe that cooperatives, when aggregated themselves, tend to be more capable of responding to these opportunities and standardizing how they might implement them. In terms of using the backup switch, that's always a challenge. I found that device to be both expedient at installs, but also, you know, another way to make distributed storage grow more quickly. And I didn't know that there was much reluctance to use it outside of the general, you know, utility mantra that is, for those of you that aren't familiar with the backup switch, you pull the meter and install what we refer to as a collar that sits in the customer's meter pan and then accepts the utility meter. There's always a reluctance to removing and reinstalling a utility asset by anyone other than a utility employee or their designated contractors. I do think that education around the capabilities and the expedience of that installation are critical to its adoption. But you know, we also have to be considerate of, you know, protectionalism, where that is in many instances a labor job that is very sensitive to anything that changes their processes.
Yeah, and just for context for people on the webinar, backup switch is one of many meter collar devices that have the impact of essentially avoiding rip out of multiple, well, up to 60 wire terminations don't have to be ripped out when a whole home backup installation is performed. These are being used by companies like Tesla. We have the backup switch. Other entities are using the Connect DER device, which is also meter collar. GeneralLink has one as well. Solar transfer switches operate similar to disconnect devices and meter collars like Tesla backup switch. On average, we are saving hours, sometimes a day of install time and install effort from labor crews. We're eliminating truck rolls. PG&E is one of our primary adopters of Tesla backup switch and went through extensive testing as part of the approval process. And the savings for customer are immense, and install costs remain one of the largest components of adopting behind the meter storage. And so I would say that with co-ops, with municipal entities, with cities, you know, I think citizen leadership and advocacy about what customers want is really important, because when it comes to coming up with the innovation needed to push something new forward, this is just time and time again with any new product, any new technology, it all starts with what customers want. And I think in that space, OEMs are completely aligned with utilities in trying to figure out what the least cost solution is, and having awareness of that all the way to the regulatory level, whether it's a co-op board, and it's the city government, it is for an IOU, it's the state regulatory entity. That's just absolutely critical, and it's important more now than ever before, because when you don't like something as a customer, you take a picture of it and you put it on the internet and decide that, you know, your utility is not helping you. But if the realities are much different, I think it's really important, like I said earlier, for utilities to have those educational opportunities and also be able to communicate that, yes, they are working on these incredibly innovative projects to save customer money, to save customers money on their installs, and just to support resiliency in their communities. And that's huge. And I think that the partnerships of the kind that we've had with utilities like PG&E have been role models for that model. Yeah.
Mark, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, or
Not
no?
particularly. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Great. This next question, I'd like all of the all panelists to offer an opinion on, and that's on the behind the meter storage for multifamily housing customers. I think it would be interesting to hear the perspective both from the utility, from the manufacturer of the storage, Tesla, and then also from the Regulatory Assistance Project. The question says, you know, it would seem challenging for this behind the meter storage for multifamily housing, but if not, does this exclude a specific customer group from the benefits that you have described? So, Mark, do you want to start by addressing the behind the meter storage for multifamily housing?
Sure. I mean, look, at a high level, this is a notorious problem across all energy technologies, where the principal agent problem, where the landlord owns the asset, or in some sense a group of customers, sometimes with co-ops or condos, where there's at best a collective action problem where everyone has to agree to do something, or at worst you have transient renters who don't care about the long-term energy profile of the building, and a landlord who doesn't care because their renter pays the energy bills. So there's a whole host of notorious problems in this space. I mean, I think some changes to how federal tax credits work is supposed to start helping some of these problems with transferability and monetization by not direct pay, by different types of entities. This is one of those that, with solar, there's been a lot of attention into community solar and other slightly different regulatory frameworks. The hard thing about multifamily housing, one hard thing in this context, is that you've encouraged the elimination of master metering, right? And you have 1 meter for each apartment or each housing unit, which makes it much harder to install storage assets for individual entities in the common space near the meter. And multifamily housing basements are not like super roomy where there's lots of room to install new things. There's just I would encourage people to start to look into this, of course, but this is a notorious regulatory and public policy issue. So open to ideas.
Yeah, I think that was a very good answer. I think I would say, as I was thinking about this question, I was thinking there's nothing specific to storage that makes it any more or less difficult than any other DERs in multifamily. A lot of it is as Mark flagged, it's the kind of age-old question of like who pays and who benefits. So I don't have any real sage advice in this area. I think a lot of it is tied to, similar to how we would handle like solar multifamily, right? It's just it's a DER that helps, helps like the economic profile of, investment for the building.
This is a tough question to go third on, but I'll just say I agree with the other panelists in that somebody's got to make that investment. It's either the owner, the occupant, or the utility. And we've had a unique challenge in the competitive retail space where that relationship with the customer is potentially transient. So some retailers in competitive areas of Texas or ERCOT have made the election to subsidize implements like thermostats as a way to retain that customer. And that's a different value proposition for a $100 Nest than it is for a $10,000 Powerwall. So, we've been shifting some of our focus to a vertically integrated utility, where at least that the utility who decides to subsidize that device, like a Green Mountain Power or a PG&E, can follow the value stream between transient occupants, which lends itself a little bit more to multifamily than a single family, perhaps realizing value from the benefit of rolling one truck or multiple trucks to one site.
Well,
Yeah, agree.
sorry, go ahead, Rishi.
Nope, just saying, Greg, totally agree. I think this is a really like ripe area and everywhere really, whether it's a Texas type market or a conventional vertical utility market. This is a perfect, to me, multifamily. It poses all of those practical challenges, and I think that utility ownership and rate-based solutions that are kind of targeted around primary use case for the utility to be able to serve its peak needs, and then providing additional resiliency benefits to the property owner that can be spread among tenants is a really ripe for exploration business model. Companies like PearlX and Armada have been working with low-income housing projects around the country, including in Texas, to try to make those work. And I think there's a ton of room for innovation there.
Well, I guess, one thing to add is that there's lots of room in rate design, especially to pay attention towards multifamily housing in general. There's actually good cost reasons to think per customer, they're cheaper to serve because they all share a service drop. There's often heating and cooling profiles that are better in multifamily housing because the walls, and they get different solar incidents compared to a single family house. So there's lots of interesting things to look at on rate design for multifamily housing. That go well beyond the storage issues.
Well, thanks. Really appreciate the answers to these questions, and also your presentations from earlier. I know I learned a lot today, and I hope that the rest of the participants did as well. So big thanks to all four of the panelists for today. Jeff, I'll pass it back to you for any final announcements.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks to you for your excellent moderation. We always appreciate your efforts and willingness to help out with that. I have a couple of corrections. First, I was remiss in thanking Jamie Scripps of Hunterston Consulting, who has helped behind the scenes quite a bit to pull this together and set the agenda for this, and who will be instrumental in preparing the summary brief. I was also incorrect in my statement about the recording. We will make a recording of this available. It'll be on our website. And in fact, if you go to CPI's website and find the other financial toolbox resources, you will find summary briefs and recordings from those on a variety of topics, which I will encourage you to do. And I also was remiss in failing to thank Jessica Diaz on our staff at CPS for all of her help behind the scenes as well. So with that, I think we are all set. Again, thank you to the panelists. We really appreciate your sharing your expertise with us as always. And until next time, we will look forward to joining with you again to talk about other topics. Thanks. Bye-bye.